Elena Harris, a black woman, moved with quiet grace through the opulent halls of the Harrington estate, her presence unnoticed except when someone needed a refill. The midday sun spilled across the marble floors, bouncing off crystal glasses and polished silvers. A string quartet played softly in the background. Notes floating through the open French doors where laughter and champagne clinks signaled the start of the annual charity brunch. Elena's uniform was pristine pressed white blouse, black skirt just below the knee, and spotless white gloves. She wiped each piece of silverware with quiet precision, her fingers steady, her movements like a dancer who knew her stage but never sought applause. "Excuse me," barked a woman in pearls, not bothering to look up. "This fork has water spots." Elena offered a warm but practiced smile and took the utensil, gently nodding without a word. She didn't flinch, not when the woman let out a sigh of exaggerated relief, not when a man beside her muttered under his breath, "Service isn't what it used to be." Across the patio, Mrs. Victoria Harrington watched Elena with an air of detached command. She raised her manicured hand slightly and gestured toward the ice bucket. Elena read the sign, "Top up the champagne." The staff moved like shadows, silent, swift, and unnoticed, but Elena was different. Not just in the way she carried herself, but in the way she listened. I get charity." One guest laughed over shrimp cocktail. "But why bring it to the front lawn?" Another added, "She's doing good work." "Sure, but does anyone really know where the money goes?" They weren't talking about Elena, but she heard the familiar tone entitled, "Oblivious," tinged with the kind of ignorance that always mistook wealth for wisdom. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, revealing a glint of gold, a pair of earrings. Delicate and expensive, though no one seemed to notice. As the guests sipped and whispered and postured, Elena stepped briefly behind the buffet table. She reached into her apron pocket and glanced at the time on her wrist. It was a simple movement, but one that didn't belong. Her watch sleek, silver-trimmed, with a glimmer of sapphire at the center caught the light. It was not a maid's watch, not even close. She turned away quickly, but not before one of the younger servers caught the shimmer. He tilted his head, slightly curious, but said nothing. Elena continued her rounds. She offered smiles when demanded, lowered her gaze when expected, but every so often, she would pause just a second too long when passing a group of guests mid-gossip. She wasn't just serving, she was listening, observing, recording. Mrs. Harrington's voice rang out from the veranda, loud and brittle. "We'll be starting speeches soon. Everyone, let's keep the champagne flowing. No dry glasses." Elena nodded at the cue, moving toward the main cooler. But before she did, her phone buzzed silently in her apron. She took a quick glance. A single message flashed on the screen. "Board ready. Final approval needed." She slipped the phone back inside. Her face gave nothing away. There was a storm brewing behind her calm eyes. A truth no one here saw coming. But they would. Oh, they would. Elena moved between linen-covered tables like clockwork. Her hands were steady, her posture straight, but her spirit was beginning to feel the weight of the room. The brunch was in full swing now, the smell of roasted lamb and warm brioche mingling with the citrusy tang of mimosas. Laughter bubbled up from every corner, but none of it reached her. She was not part of the celebration, she was the help, and this crowd never let anyone forget that. A woman in a floral hat snapped her fingers yes, snapped and pointed to her half-empty glass. "Sweetheart," she said, not bothering with a name. "I said no pulp." Elena took the glass, gently nodded, and turned on her heel. As she walked away, she heard the woman say under her breath, "Honestly, I don't know how people live like that." Laughter followed, sharp, careless. A man across the table added, "Bet she's got 6 kids at home and still thinks this is a good gig." Another chuckled. "At least she's working." Can't say that for most of them. They didn't even lower their voices. They didn't even look at her because they didn't see her. Not really. To them, she was a shadow moving dishes, a background prop to their shallow parade of charity. Elena's fingers tightened briefly around the tray, just enough to steady herself. She breathed in, counted to 3, exhaled, Grace under fire, she had mastered that long ago. Then came Mrs. Harrington, strutting through the patio with a practiced smile that barely stretched her skin. "Elena," she said sharply, without glancing up. "Those glasses are streaked. Wipe them again. Please." The please was a formality. There was no kindness in it. "Yes, ma'am," Elena replied, even though she'd wiped them twice already. She took the tray to the corner prep table and began polishing each flute again. Slower this time. Not because they needed it, but because she needed the pause. Her phone buzzed again. She glanced around, no one watching. She stepped behind the ivy-covered partition where the catering staff took their breaks and answered the call. "Dr. Harris," the voice said. Crisp. Respectful. "Go ahead," she said. Her tone suddenly different, firmer. Professional. Not the soft, muted voice she used here. "We've confirmed the donations. Your keynote slot is final. The board is excited." "Good," Elena said. She glanced back at the tables, where a guest was using a linen napkin to blot a lipstick-stained wine glass. "I'll handle it once this is done." She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her apron. Her mask returned just as easily. Back on the floor, the jokes continued. One woman giggled and said, "Maybe we should donate a vacuum to her. God knows she lives in dust." Elena offered a faint smile, even as her stomach turned. She reminded herself this was temporary, this uniform, this house, this room full of people who thought money bought decency. As she refilled glasses and cleared empty plates, she caught snippets of gossip, fragments of egos, and thinly veiled prejudice wrapped in perfume and pearls. But inside, she wasn't shrinking, she was calculating, quietly gathering, like a storm held at bay by sheer will. There was power in being underestimated, and Elena knew better than anyone. The higher they looked down on you, the harder it would hit when you rose. The brunch was winding toward its predictable crescendo. Champagne flutes refilled. Dessert trays swapped out for espresso shots. And dry. Performative claps for the pianist in the corner. The sun filtered through the estate's vast garden awnings, casting dappled light over white linen and inherited arrogance. Elena moved silently, clearing dishes with a grace no one noticed. But behind her composed eyes, the clock was ticking. Then, a soft chime from the gate. A delivery man appeared, winding up the gravel path in polished shoes, carrying something that didn't belong in this curated world of crystal and caviar, a sleek silver briefcase. He moved past the guests, unnoticed, until he stopped directly in front of Elena. He dipped his head respectfully and handed it to her. "They're ready when you are, ma'am." The words were quiet, the tone deferential. Elena nodded, her hand tightening briefly around the handle. Thank you," she replied, voice low but controlled. Across the terrace, one of the guests looked up from her cappuccino, eyes narrowing. Her expression flickered, not recognition, not quite, but curiosity. A few feet away, near the service station, two younger servers leaned toward each other as Elena disappeared into the house with the case. One whispered, "She drives a Tesla." "Did you know that?" "No way," the other replied. "A maid. She parked behind the hedge this morning. I saw her getting out in heels." Their words dissolved as Elena stepped inside the mansion's sun-drenched corridor, her footsteps barely audible on the polished marble. She passed portraits of stiff-faced ancestors and untouched rooms staged only for social optics. Her path was steady, purposeful. She reached the study, closed the door, turned the lock with a soft click. Inside, the air felt different, cooler, quieter, like the first hush before a curtain rises. She placed the briefcase gently on the mahogany desk and clicked it open. Inside was a laptop. Slim, matte black. Nothing flashy until the screen lit up and revealed what lay beneath the surface of her quiet demeanor. Encrypted dashboards, real-time market movements, private equity updates, a boardroom calendar with her name scheduled to speak next week in Singapore. Elena pulled up one document, an acquisition summary. The company was a household name, the CEO's, one of the brunch guests currently laughing over canapes on the terrace. She studied a few notes, adjusted clauses, saved the file. Then she opened her inbox, dozens of unread emails. One caught her eye. Forbes interview confirmed. Profile scheduled for next month. She allowed herself the smallest smile, not smugs, just grounded. Outside, she could still hear the faint notes of the brunch ensemble. People clinked glasses. Somewhere, Mrs. Harrington was likely complaining about a fingerprint on her heirloom silver. None of them knew, not yet. But the whispers had begun. A guest had noticed the briefcase. A server had caught a glimpse of her car. The veneer was starting to crack. And what lay beneath it was far more formidable than anyone had imagined. Elena shut the laptop and locked the briefcase again. She straightened her posture, smoothed her apron, and unlocked the door. Time to return to character, but not for much longer. The moment had finally arrived. Guests adjusted their postures, wine glasses half raised, napkins dabbed at lipstick, and polite anticipation buzzed through the air like champagne bubbles. At the front of the terrace, beneath a trellised arch draped in orchids, Mrs. Harrington stood with both arms raised, like she was about to deliver a sermon. She tapped her fork against the glass to quiet the room, smiling as if the sound of applause were already ringing in her ears. Thank you, everyone, for coming to our 7th annual Garden Hearts brunch. She began. This charity means the world to us, supporting tech education for underprivileged children, because everyone deserves a chance, no matter where they come from. There it was, the well-polished irony slipped through her glossed lips like honey over a rusted spoon. Elena stood a few feet behind her, perfectly still, a folded linen napkin in one hand, the silver briefcase resting by her feet. Her eyes moved over the crowd, every face either oblivious or full of self-congratulating pride, until a voice cut through the air like a piano string snapping. Wait a second. Are you Dr. Elena Harris? All heads turned. A guest at table 5, young, sharp-eyed, wearing a press badge clipped to her cream blazer, leaned forward, disbelief etched across her face. The tech investor. You were on the Wired 100 list last year. Silence fell over the garden like a curtain of thunderclouds. Mrs. Harrington froze mid-sentence, lips parted as if the words had jammed in her throat. Eyes pivoted, and Elena moved. She stepped forward, graceful, deliberate, the echo of her shoes crisp on the flagstone. Gone was the invisible maid. She looked taller somehow. Or maybe the weight of pretense had simply lifted. Yes, Elena said evenly, her voice clear but unhurried. I'm Dr. Elena Harris. Gasps rustled through the guests like a rising wind. Elena's gaze didn't waver. I have a background in software engineering, and I've spent the last decade funding startups that develop ethical AI in education and healthcare. Some of the programs you praise today. My foundation wrote the first checks. She glanced at Mrs. Harrington, who stood stock still, mascara heavy on lashes that blinked a little too quickly. I also funded this very event, Elena added, including the rental fees for this venue and the education grants that were just announced. From her briefcase, she pulled out a document, a check, printed with 7 figures, her name clearly signed in looping black ink. She held it up, just long enough for every camera and every eye to catch it. And before anyone asks, Elena said with a quiet smile, I volunteered to help today because I wanted to see firsthand how people are treated when you think they have nothing to offer you. Not a word. Just shame. Raw. Red-faced. Uncomfortable silence. Guests who had waved her off without a second glance now couldn't meet her eyes. Mrs. Harrington opened her mouth, then closed it. Her throat worked, but no sound came. One guest slowly set their mimosa down. Another adjusted his tie. Some looked toward the journalist, hoping she might say this was all performance art. It wasn't. Elena folded the check again, set it on the podium beside Mrs. Harrington, and stepped back. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was enough. Her truth undeniable. The moment unforgettable. And the lesson just beginning. For a long moment, no one moved. The birds kept singing in the trees above the garden, blissfully unaware that beneath them, an entire social world had cracked wide open. Then came the awkward shuffling, the way people always move when the truth arrives wearing different shoes than expected. One of the guests, a man in a pale blue linen suit who had earlier made a joke about teaching the help some manners, stepped forward first, clearing his throat. "Dr. Harris," he said, adjusting his cufflinks with a trembling hand. "I had no idea." "I truly hope you didn't think Elena raised a single brow." He stopped mid-sentence. Another guest mumbled an apology into her champagne flute. "Love your work," someone else offered, as if compliments could wash away contempt. None of it landed. They weren't apologizing because they saw her now. They were apologizing because they'd been seen. And still, Elena didn't gloat. Her face remained poised, her expression unreadable. The real victory wasn't in their regret. It was in the quiet dignity that had carried her through every condescending glance. Every demand snapped like a finger. Every moment they made her feel invisible. The younger servers watched from behind the buffet, standing a little taller now. One of them, a girl with braids tucked beneath a server's cap, gave a subtle nod, chin up, eyes shining a silent salute. In the middle of the chaos, Mrs. Harrington was frozen in place. Her speech papers fluttered in her hand like wilted petals. The smile she had worn like armor was gone, replaced by something brittle, something cracked. "I didn't know," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Elena turned to her. Their eyes met. "I know," she said gently. "That's the problem." "Mrs. Harrington blinked, like someone hearing an echo from a very far-off place. The check still sat on the podium beside her. Heavy, unignorable, real. Elena picked up her briefcase and walked through the crowd. Heads turned as she passed, some in awe, others in shame. No one stopped her this time. No one dared. She passed by the caterer station and paused. She placed a folded note on the counter for the staff, her real tip. As she reached the garden gate, one of the youngest staff members ran up, breathless. "Dr. Harris, does this mean you're not pulling the funding?" Elena turned, her smile slow and deliberate. "I'm not here to punish anyone," she said. "I'm here to remind them what real grace looks like." And with that, she left. Behind her, the murmurs resumed. But they were different now, quieter, heavier. People who had once measured worth in silk tablecloths and last names were left to re-examine their own. Back in the kitchen, someone finally burst out laughing, a server who had watched the whole thing unfold like a movie. "That was legendary," he said. "Absolutely legendary." And no one disagreed, because Elena Harris, the woman they'd all ignored, hadn't just changed the tone of the party, she'd changed the room forever. The heavy front door of the mansion clicked shut behind her. Elena stepped into the sunlight, crisp apron still tied around her waist, but her posture had shifted shoulders back, chin high, a quiet force wrapped in elegance. She paused at the edge of the stone steps, slowly untied the apron, and folded it neatly in her hands, as if closing the final chapter of someone else's story. Then, without a backward glance, she walked toward the sleek black sedan waiting at the curb. The valet, who had ignored her earlier, now rushed to open the door. I didn't realize you were," she gave a polite nod, slid into the leather seat, and closed the door herself. The car pulled away. Behind her, the mansion shrank in the rearview mirror, the laughter, the gasps, the awkward silences, all of it blurred behind tinted glass. Let them talk. Let them remember. Up ahead, the city skyline glittered in the midday sun, glass towers rising like possibility, steel and brilliance. 15 minutes later, the elevator dinged softly on the 43rd floor. Elena stepped out, now dressed in tailored navies, heels clicking against marble. Her assistant greeted her with a tablet, rattling off numbers, client calls, and market shifts. Elena smiled, not because she had proven them wrong, but because she'd always known who she was. The woman who had once cleared their plates now sat at the table where the real decisions were made. And this time, they'd remember her name.